Hello and welcome to this online tutorial for the students of third semester who have chosen Communicative English as part of their Ability Enhancement course. I am Professor Nirmalya Biswas from the Department of English, and in this episode we are going to talk about writing application letters, which is part of Module 2 of your AC2 syllabus. Now, writing application letters is not really something you are unfamiliar with at all. In fact, many of you actually must have written a number of application letters by now. You might have written an application letter for yourself or might have helped somebody write theirs. The point is, there are certain rules and techniques that make some application letters stand out from the rest, and often that helps you in many ways, from getting your request being granted to getting your proposals being accepted. So, in this tutorial, we are going to discuss a few points that would help you understand how you can improve your application writing skills. As I am sharing this presentation with you, you would be able to listen to me as well as watch the tutorial on your screens. Also, the transcript of this lecture will be shared alongside the video, so you can come back and read the material anytime. Alright, so let's begin and let's learn to write an application letter. So the very first question that comes to our mind is, what is an application letter? To put it simply, an application letter is a letter which is formal in tone and approach. That means you are not writing an application to a friend or a relative. And this is neither a piece of creative writing nor a piece of casual or imaginative piece of writing. Rather, it is highly structured and segmented piece of official communication, which means an application letter contains a number of segments and sections, and each of these sections serves a very specific purpose. Now, we would be talking about these sections in the next few slides. And then if we are talking about, if you are thinking about the purpose of writing an application, we see that it concerns a number of specific areas, such as seeking employment, seeking permission or services. Then an application could be handwritten or typed out, and it could be delivered by hand, by post or via email. Now, essentially, since you are writing this application to a person in authority, you are sending it to an office with a receiving section. So, of course, your application could be delivered by hand or by post. And if this office or this person has a website and they have an email address on this website, you can definitely get in touch with them via email. So what are the different types of application letters and what purposes do they serve? Now, we can identify mainly three types of application letters around us. The first is a job application letter. This is when a potential candidate seeks employment or tenure at a professional body like an organization or an office. Now, in corporate cultures, a job application letter is also called a cover letter because it accompanies a biodata or a resume. The second type, I'm sure most of you are already familiar with it, is called an academic application letter. Now, this is when a student applies for permissions, grants, and sanctions from the authority. I'm sure in some point of time, most of you have applied for certain kind of leave or certain kind of scholarship, amenities, facilities, or permissions to attend seminars or workshops in your student days. So all of these activities merit writing an academic application letter. The third type of application is much more personal or general in nature. This is when a citizen seeks various services or redressals from different government or non-government bodies. So say if you are looking for opening a bank account, or you are trying to get a new SIM card for your mobile, or you need to update your ration card details or your different ID card detail, or you need a passport, or you need a police verification report. So you need to apply to different government or non-government authorities or companies or organizations, and sometimes also you write an application as a letter of complaint. Say you are not getting a proper service, or you need to get something repaired in your or looked after in your locality or area. So all these kinds of issues could generate a personal or general application letter. So here is a sample application letter by a student who requests the authorities for an alternative date for his exam because he has some medical emergency. You can take your time and pause the video to read the entire text of the letter. In the next few slides, we would try to analyze how the structure of this letter is divided into specific segments and all the parts are actually working together to make this a really effective application. So as you can see, I have highlighted all the different sections of the letter and have also labeled them accordingly. Now you need to understand one thing, that each section of the letter is structurally important and each of them serves a specific purpose. So let's talk a little bit about them and moving on to the next slide. So the first section is called a header. You can see it on the top left corner of the document. The header contains details of the recipient, namely the name of the person or designation, affiliation and location. Now on this document you can see that this letter is addressed to the Director of Foreign Language Study Center. That means it contains the designation of the person and his affiliation. Then comes the location. You can see that the address of this institution is also mentioned. Now, while sending this application, you have to be sure of one thing, that is, you are sending it to the right person. Now, unless you are sending your application to the right person in the chain of system, your issue or your problem might not get resolved, or the person might not be able to facilitate you. So that's why it's absolutely important for you to know to whom you are addressing your application and sending it thereafter. The next part is mentioning the date on which you are writing or sending your application. You can find it on the top right corner of the letter. Now, mentioning the date on the application can be helpful because it can be used as a useful reference point for the future communications. Sometimes it so happens that you might need to send a reminder, and then these previous dates could be used as a reference point. The next part is called the subject line. Now, the subject line acts as an immediate statement of purpose for writing this application. Even before going through the main text of the letter, the recipient can immediately understand what this application is all about just by taking a glance at the subject line. For this reason, the subject line is often called a one-line gist of the main body, and it should be concise but clear. The subject line should not be too long or complex, but it should contain all necessary information. For example, the subject line on this application says, "Prayer for changing the dates of viva voce on medical grounds." So all necessary information is summarized into that one line. So that is why you should take extra care while composing that subject line, because it will make or break the possibility of your application being accepted or rejected. Moving on to the next slide, the subject line is followed by a salutation. Now on your screens, you can see the green arrow pointing towards the phrase, "Dear Sir." This is an example of a salutation. At this point, before arriving at the issue, the applicant formally acknowledges the recipient and starts the conversation. Now, you have to keep in mind that even though you are addressing the recipient formally, it should not sound mechanical. So, if you know the gender of the person, you can address "Dear Sir" or "Dear Madam." Or if you are not sure about the gender of the recipient, you can say "Dear Sir" or "Madam." Also, in certain professional circles, if the recipient is known to the applicant, the surname is often used, like "Dear Mr. John," "Dear Miss Smith," something like this. Also, in academia, we have seen the usages like "Dear Professor Joseph," "Dear Dr. Sen." and so on and so forth. Next comes the introduction. This is where the applicant, after acknowledging the recipient, formally now introduces herself or himself. You can see in this sample, the student is duly introducing himself to the director. He mentions his language course, he mentions his roll number, and then he goes on to explain the context of the application. In this section, Ramesh clearly explains why he is writing this application, and we are informed that he is writing this application in context of his forthcoming examination. Here, we would also learn how this introduction part is making way for further explanation in the following segments. So, in the previous slide, we learned how the introduction section sets the stage for presenting the arguments in favor of the demands or requests made in the application. Now, the section that follows introduction is called the body or the main body of the letter, and it elaborates on the main agenda. It thoroughly explains the matter or the problem on part of the applicant, and then it aims at convincing the recipient so that whatever demand or request is made in the application is granted or accepted. You can see in the main body of the sample letter how Ramesh clearly explains his inability to appear in his Viva Voce exams on a certain date due to his medical emergency. He has already explained the context in the introduction part, and now he is building upon that and presenting his argument in the favor of his demands or request. His request being a change of date in the Viva Voce exam. See how Ramesh is trying to convince the director of his study center into agreeing to the request by using phrases like medical grounds or humanitarian grounds. So always remember to use the crucial information and the correct stock of words whenever you are composing the main body of the letter. The next segment is called the conclusion, which effectively ends the textual part of the letter on polite and positive notes. Again, you can refer to the sample letter and see how Ramesh is expressing his hopefulness for his impending desire for his request to be accepted, and he ends the letter on a positive note. And see how the tone is persuasive but not needy. So while he is expecting his request to be accepted, he is not showing over eagerness. So there is a balance. So always remember to conclude the letter on a polite but positive note. Now let's talk about the final three segments of the letter. These three segments are more technical than textual in nature, and if you look at the structure of the application, you would notice that the first and the last three sections serve technical purposes, whereas the middle part is more explanatory in nature. So you already know that you can also divide the middle section into three parts, namely the introduction, the body, and the conclusion. So the first of the last three is called the sign off, and it is also called a valediction. In contrast to the salutation, which acts as an introductory greeting, the valediction functions as a farewell greeting. If you again refer to the sample letter, you would learn how, after writing the conclusion, you should sign off with a note of thanks, and you should also use phrases like yours faithfully or yours sincerely to express courtesy and politeness. The section that comes after valediction is called the signature. You can say this is the header section in reverse, because just as the header section needs to include all necessary information regarding the recipient, you need to do exactly the opposite with the signature section. So if you are writing an application, here in this section you must put the crucial information like the name, social or professional profile, and contact details of yourself. Also, do not forget to put in your full signature, because this authenticates you as the sender or the applicant. The final section is called the attachment. Now you must remember that this section doesn't have to be there on every application. If only you need to send some additional documents with your application to support your claims, only then should you make a list of all these supporting documents and add this section at the end of your application letter. So far we have discussed a number of technical and practical aspects of an application letter, and we have tried to learn a few tricks to master the style of application writing. So in this section, we would just sum up what you have learned so far. So here are a few do's and don'ts, and you try to remember these whenever you need to send in an application. So remember that the letter should be focused and logically arranged. It should maintain the structure. It should be concise, but it should carry all relevant information. Then it should be formatted in a good font and font size. I'm coming to this point in the next slide. And also remember that at any point of time, you should not have grammatical and spelling errors in your application letter. That's a big no-no for you, and if you have certain mistakes, certain spelling mistakes or grammatical errors in your application, that only shows that you are a sloppy writer, or maybe even a sincere, maybe even an insincere applicant. So never leave any scope for grammatical or spelling mistakes. And the last point, your letter should not contain unnecessary or false information. So, we already know that an application can be handwritten or can be typed out. Now that we are living in the digital age, more and more official letters are being typed out every day on digital devices than being written in pen and paper. So, which fonts to use? My suggestion would be that you must always choose a font which is simple, elegant, pleasing to the eyes, and doesn't really try too hard to impress. So try to avoid any of these fonts in official letters which are a little bit adventurous, or one can say a little bit show off. So I have listed a few fonts for you, but this is definitely not a final or a universal list. So you are free to explore, but do it with caution and care. So the font size in your application letter should be from 10 to 12, and you can use Calibri, Times New Roman, Arial, Verdana, Georgia, Garamond, Trebuchet, Cambria, etc. And certain fonts you should avoid, like Comic Sans, Courier, Brushed Script, Papyrus, Lucida Handwriting, Broadway, Vivaldi, Gigi, etc. Alright, so with that we have come to an end of this online tutorial. I hope you have enjoyed the discussion and have benefited from the lecture. So thank you for watching. I wish you all the best. Happy learning and God bless.